my creative friends. Today I'm going to be painting and showing you how I created this whimsical winged bird, and I can't wait to show you how it all comes together. All the layers are so pretty with the watercolor. For those of you who might like to have a tracer to go ahead and paint it yourself, I do have a sketchbook membership. The link will be down in the description box. It's easy to join and very reasonably priced, and I so appreciate those who have become members and support my channel that way. The watercolor paper I'm going to be using is the Canson brand 140-pound watercolor paper, and the watercolors I'm going to be using are the Paul Rubens. I always encourage everyone to buy just a little bit better watercolor paper and just use the watercolors you might have. I'm going to be starting with the eye of this bird, and I'm going to be using the color Coal Black. I'm going to be mixing a consistency of about milk, so I don't want a lot of water when I do my eye because I want that color to stay concentrated and located right in that area. So I'm going to take my black paint on my dry paper and keep my small round brush right inside of that eye. And definitely go ahead and tap it on a paper towel before you put it on your eye. That just allows you to check how much water you have and color you have in your brush. I'm making that round circle, and I'm trying to keep a little white catch light if I can. You might want to practice this off to the side first. I'm going to be showing you a technique of how you're going to be able to blend that eye into the rest of the head. So make an additional round circle off to the side just to test the way I'm going to be showing you next. For the color of the head of my bird, I'm going to be mixing ultramarine blue and coal black together. I love the way the ultramarine blue kind of granulates and gives a little bit of texture. The combination of the two colors makes a rich form of black without being too dark, and it really does tone down the French ultramarine. When I'm painting the head, I'm going around the eye at first, leaving a white circle. But as my circle area is done, I'm going to take my brush and lightly tap into that dark circle, allowing that color of the black eye to come out into the head. It's going to blend the colors because the black is still slightly wet and the paint on the outside of the head that I'm putting on is wet, so it's going to naturally want to flow to that area. If you did do a little tester circle off to the side, you might want to try this technique first on your practice paper before you do it on your bird. It's a great look though. It's a wonderful way to set your eye back into the eye of the bird head and not have it look like it's just sitting right on top. The white little donut around the outside brings a brightness, but you want to be able to combine that area together with your head. Once I have the head area done, I need to choose a different area that will have a dry paper in between. If I work on that neck or the beak right now, my colors will blend out into those areas of the black from the head into that next color I do, because watercolor always wants to travel where the paper is wet. So I want to choose an area that has a dry spot in between. So I'm going to be starting on this back wing here. This has got a lot of different patterns in it, so I want to have a variety of colors. I'm going to be starting with this bright shade of yellow called cadmium yellow first, and then I'm going to be tapping in a little bit of the Indian yellow, which is actually a little bit more orange than what you think. I'm also going to be using a little bit of the rusty color in my set is called umber to add a little bit more rust. I wanted to make sure I had some of the rust, and I was going to be putting the blue into this color of my bird. So the rust and the blue and the yellow and the blue are complementary colors. So that's why I was choosing this set of colors. Once I had my yellow on, my paper is now wet, so I'm just basically taking the other colors and then tapping them into the wet area and allowing the colors to blend. I call it watercolor magic. It's not a lot of work. The color and the wet from the water is really going to work together and blend your colors and make those beautiful watercolor blends. The next area I was going to work on was his tail. I wanted to mix up my watercolor about the consistency of tea. Very clear, it's a very subtle amount of watercolor. I want to have this area pretty much colored all the way with the color underneath because I'm looking at wanting to layer many colors on this particular area. You can see where the flower patterns are drawn, but I still wanted to have that color underneath my flowers. So I mix my color with a lot of water into it, about tea consistency, and I pretty much cover that whole bird area there. Now I went ahead and just picked up a little bit more color randomly, and I'm going to be tapping it in similar how I did with the colors up above. But this color, I do have a little bit more water in it. It's probably about, well, let's just say coffee consistency, where it's got a little bit more opaqueness than tea, but it's not so dark or opaque like milk. I know, there's lots of food analogies with watercolor painting, but it's a good way to explain it. If you think about tea being super thin and clear, coffee being a little bit harder to see through, but you still can see through it, and milk you really can't see through, it's a lot more opaque. Those are some guidelines to kind of keep in mind when you're putting watercolor on. Here I'm using my clean brush. I had washed it out in water, tapped it on my paper pretty much dry, and I'm just running it along that edge of that very first patch I did, kind of just to clean up that line so it's got a nice smooth line there. Now the next color I'm going to be using is called Cobalt Blue is what I'm going to be using, and I wanted to do that combination of the blues and the rust and the yellows, and that's the color I'm going to be using on his breastplate underneath there. Now I do have a very kind of more detailed pattern that I've drawn with the pencil there. I'm still going to be able to see that pattern once my watercolor dries, and I'm just going to go over that whole area with about the coffee consistency of the blue, or even maybe more like leaning towards tea, I guess, too. Very light. Then I pick up some of the violet color in my set, and I'm going to be tapping that in. Now this is a little darker color, but this violet really does fade quite a lot as it dries. So I feel confident that I'm okay with going ahead and tapping in a little bit more of that purple. I'm using my brush and I'm lifting a little bit of it and settling down the polka dottiness, if that's a word, the polka dot quality of my patterns to make them a little bit more subtle. And I'm adding a little bit of a tap tap motion to settle my colors down just a little bit. But I'm still going to be able to see my pencil lines when this color dries. I'm going to be picking up those blues over there that I had used for the breast color too, and I'm going to be using that for those two big plants that are up on the top. They're just a whimsically drawn plant. They're really not a real one. It's just a made-up one. It's kind of a doodle pattern, and I'm going to be coloring it in that lighter shade of the cobalt blue first, and then I'm going to be adding the color of Payne's Gray on top. So I added a very light shade of the blue, coming in with Payne's Gray, mixed to about that coffee consistency, and then tapping that on the bottom. And because the first color of blue I put on made the paper wet by tapping that darker color at the base, that should draw up into that lighter color and make those really pretty blends of color. Payne's Gray is one of my most favorite colors to use in watercolor. It's got a rich quality of that dark blue, and it's one of my favorites to use. So hopefully the set you have eventually buy, or you buy your one, will have a Payne's Gray color in it for you. To do the little seed pods of the flowers, I took some Payne's Gray and I mixed it to about milk consistency. I'm wanting really a dark, rich pigmented bit of watercolor here. I'm hoping that in the end, if I do my backgrounds, because they are such a small little element, if the blue that I'm doing on my background happens to touch these little blue seed pods, it might just gently bleed into the background, and I'm going to be okay with that look. So I'm looking for that deeper concentrated bit of color, and then hopefully I'll have some happy accidents in the end, and some of that color might just kind of gently bleed into my background. I'm going to do that same technique of tapping in that really rich color of Payne's Gray and that same consistency of milk into the inside of the pods. They're still a little wet, so that color should kind of softly blend when I tap those little dots in to make the little seed patterns inside of those pods. I'm going to continue that same look over on the next whimsical flower by tapping in the color on the pods. I'm only going to be doing this color on some of the ends. I'm going to be using a different color for the other ones. I'm going to continue working on my background elements, and I'm going to work on those cherry, berries, whatever they might be, and I'm going to be painting them all three the same color, and I want to try to leave a little bit of a catch light, a really bright white spot on my berries. I'm going to be using that color, the Indian yellow, for an orange, and then I'm going to be tapping in also a little bit of a red color called cadmium red light. The combination of those two colors make beautiful berries. I usually take the darker red and do it on the edges and keep the light orange in the middle. It's really helpful to have this little small brush and being able to tap my colors. There's a lot of tapping going on when you're doing watercolor. A lot of times it's not necessarily a full brush stroke when you're doing these small little paintings. The body of my bird has had plenty of time to dry, so now I'm going to work on the next elements there. I'm going to be using that cobalt blue color to do that little bit of band around the neck of the bird. This is mixed to about coffee consistency. And then I'm going to use that same shade of blue and run that band down the center of my two winged areas that I had already done. This is that blue I'm bringing into my bird that will be complementary colors to those yellows and oranges, and it's really going to make it pop in the end. I'm going to pick up a little bit of the color yellow ochre, and that's what I'm going to be using for the beak of my bird. I'm going to switch back to my really small brush, and I'm going to be mixing about tea consistency for this one. I want it to be fairly light, and I'm going to use my small brush and go ahead and put my color in. I'm going to color it all the way in with that color, and then once I have the beak all colored in, I'm going to rinse my brush out, tap it on my paper towel to make sure it's kind of a thirsty brush, they call it. That'll allow it to pick up color, and I'm going to wipe that on the top of my beak, and I'm going to pick up just a little bit of the color to create a white highlight on the top of my beak. Hopefully you can kind of see how the white is there and how the eye looks and how all the colors are drying. Using that thirsty brush technique comes in really helpful with creating highlights in your watercolor painting. That last little area of the bird, I want it to be a bright pop of green. So I'm using my color in my set called yellow green and also mixing a little bit of tree green in there as well. In that little palette area, you see that kind of bluish green that's up there, a little bit of a spot. That's called emerald green deep. It's a very powerful color, but it is a nice pop of color when you want to use a bright shade of green. I often mix that color with my other ones before I put it directly on a painting. It's a very powerful color, and I don't usually use it very straight, but it is a beautiful color to be able to add that extra pop of color. I also pick up a little bit of a blue color called sky blue. It's kind of a little less highly pigmented than the ultramarine blue. It's more of a grayish kind of blue, and I pick a little bit of that color up and I tap some of that into that winged area as well. So again, I'm kind of doing bright pops of green with a little bit of blue. I often have a spot in my palette. With watercolor, you can always reuse whatever might be dry in your palette, so it's very common for me to have a patch of green that always sits there. And I often just pick up a little bit of the color that I have in my dried palette, maybe perhaps mix it with some of the new, but it's often what I keep my paint on, and I always need just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So it's hard to say that I'm using just one shade of green. I'm using multiple shades of green, and it's super helpful to have that bigger area of green in my palette box to be able to always be able to pick up some watercolor of green shades when I need to. I switch back to that very small round brush. It's probably about a 0.1 size, but having that very nice sharp tip at the end allows me to pull these lines and make a nice skinny line. This small brush is even going to allow me to pick up just a little bit darker color and be able to run just a slightly darker color on the shadow side of those small little stems. Having a really small brush like a 0.1 is super helpful to have in your brush collection. This is not a watercolor brush. This is just a super inexpensive, I think I bought it at Joann Fabrics. They don't have good brushes there. They have inexpensive brushes, but it works well for what I needed to do for this particular painting. It's not uncommon for people to think that they have to have all the right materials before they can start using watercolor, but that's just not true. For 3 years, I actually painted with using watercolor markers, the Crayola markers that kids use. I would just take the markers, rub it on some plastic, create a patch of color, then add a little bit of water to create the watercolor, and then would just brush it onto my paper and used it just like watercolor. So don't be discouraged if you don't have everything. It's more about just practicing and enjoying the process and creating. It can be just for fun. You don't have to worry about creating a perfect piece of art. Just get your colors and your paper out and paint. It's a fun way to relax and unwind, and you might create something really pretty and that you're going to be super proud of. That being said, I also want to remind you that you are worth buying the better paper, a little bit better quality of paint. If you enjoy watercolor, spend the extra money and buy some better material. I always say life is short, buy the good paint, right? Well, let's continue on to paint. You can see I'm just doing some very simple little brush strokes, randomly putting on those different shades of green that I have in that little side palette. By adding the little different bits of shades as I go down my plant and as it's going down, it's just going to add a lot more interest instead of all being the same color. I'm going to be doing it lightly at first, more like that coffee consistency, and then I'm picking up a little bit darker, more like that milk consistency, and I'm tapping it at the base of my leaves. And because my leaves are wet, that color should gently melt up and blend into that other area. I'm going to carry on that same type of look onto that green area of the little patch on the body and re-emphasize all the little leaves that are drawn in that area. My drawing today was inspired by a needlepoint picture I had seen on Pinterest. It was a vintage needlepoint. It had these beautiful patterns, and I liked the idea of having whimsical patterns inside of a simple bird shape. The shape of the bird, if you think about it, is basically just kind of a gentle check mark with the tail going up and the head going the opposite way. And then the flowers are just very simply whimsical style, doodle style flowers. So I thought that would make a great painting by adding these beautiful shades of color with these whimsical patterns. I'm hoping you're liking to paint it too. For those who are my sketchbook membership, you know that you can also use mixed media paper. If you don't like to draw, you can take the patterns and then actually run your mixed media paper through your printer. Make sure you tape it onto your regular copy paper, and then you can have that paper come out with the design already on it, and you don't even have to sketch it if you don't want to sketch. You can also use a light box for the tracers. You can take the tracer, put it on under your light box, and then put your watercolor paper right on top. You're going to be able to see the patterns just fine and be able to trace it quite easily. I too like using the tracers. I often do these paintings more than once, so I go ahead and I use the tracers multiple times. And I also like to do them in different mediums. Here I'm showing you watercolor, but this would be beautiful in mixed media, acrylic paint, whatever you might like to use. Once you have it basically drawn, you can create it any way you want. For the bottom of the grass areas, I just selected a bunch of different shades of green and put them on. I'm going to be adding a little bit more interest to this grass area by adding a little bit more doodle patterns in with my ink work at the end. So once I have it all painted with my watercolor, I'm going to let it dry really well, and then I'm going to be putting my ink work on top of that. I don't know if you can quite notice, but there is an irregular border all the way around the picture. So some of the borderline, the background will only go to just so far and then it will stop. And there's going to be just a really irregular white line. But some of the items have been drawn to go past that border. And I really like that look of having some of those elements pop up into that plain border look. I've almost got this little birdie done, already painted. Feel free to add your own patterns to yours as well. Even if you have the tracer, feel free to add your patterns any way you would like to be able to add your patterns, as well as paint it where it makes you happy as well too. These are the colors I chose, but this little bird would be really great in bright and colorful patterns as well. I'm going to be adding some simple little washes over the top of these little flowers at the bottom. And because of that rich color of that rust tones underneath, it's going to affect the colors that I put on top. Because water is translucent, all the layers make a difference. So by adding my colors of purple that I'm going to be adding on, I'm going to be adding a little bit of violet. And then I also have a color called Madder Red, which is kind of a purplish red color. And I'm going to be adding it on the top to make my flowers, but those rusty tones underneath are still going to affect the colors I put on the top. At this point, the first layers of color I put on have had plenty of time to dry, and I can see how the color has faded. Watercolor always dries slightly lighter, so the colors you see when they're wet won't be that when they dry. So I'm going to be adding another layer on some of my areas. For this part of the video, I'm going to go ahead and speed it up as I'm adding the next layers, but you're going to be able to see how by adding those next layers really adds the contrast, and you're going to be able to see how the colors really do come to life by adding those next layers. Well, let's go ahead and speed this up while I do this part. Now that I have the main part of my bird painted, I'm going to start working on the background. I'm going to be using those colors sky blue and a little bit of ultramarine blue as well. When painting that background, I still want to leave that little bit of irregular white line on those three sides. When working on my backgrounds, I like to change the direction of my brush so I have more of an irregular color pattern in the background. I need to keep in mind that my colors are fairly fresh, and I could lift my colors if I spend too much time detailing too close to my bird. So when I'm putting on my backgrounds, I move fairly fast. I don't spend a lot of time adding lots of color to that background. If I needed to go deeper, I would go ahead and put on a layer of my watercolor, let it dry, and then go ahead and add another layer. So I want to kind of keep my background more to light to medium color when I'm putting it on. That way I can go ahead and just move quickly, make those brush strokes, and keep on going. And when I'm going around those small little leaves, it's okay to have a little bit of white showing there. I kind of like that look, but I don't want completely white halos around all of them. This is that area I had talked about earlier where the concentration of the color of those little seed pods that are coming off was quite deep there. And perhaps I might end up having some of that color mix out into my area. And if I do, it's going to be a nice, sweet surprise. But if I don't, it's fine too. But you can see how I'm just kind of basically painting over that little seed pod area, but not adding a lot of water. If I only wanted to try to paint around each little individual item, that would just be far too tedious and probably wouldn't look that great when I got done anyway. So I'm just using a light touch, moving back and forth and going right over those small little details. And this last little area here, and then I will be completed. I do add just a little bit more in the one area that I thought looked a little light compared to some of the other ones. So again, you could let it dry and then take a look if you need to add more dark color to your background. Once I have given my painting plenty of time to dry, I'm going to go ahead and put the ink work on. I'm going to be using my favorite black pen. It's a micron pen, and I'm going to be using the 01 nib. I do like those small little nibs to put in these small little details. Now, if you watch me often, you know I often like to do very sketchy style work when I'm doing my outlining or ink work with this. But this particular project, I'm probably doing a little bit more refined work with all the doodle patterns going on and all that type of texture already in my painting. I basically just wanted to add the line work to add that deep dark color of the black. So I'm doing more of a reserved type of line work on this particular one. I'm going to go ahead and speed this part up as well so you can see how this picture comes together, and I'm hoping you're liking yours as well.
Sunbeams crawling on the floor, bare feet touching the day before. Coffee steam dances, lazy and slow. Dreams still whisper where I go. Through the window glow, I see it clear. The turning world, it pulls me.
If you've made it this far into the video, I wanted to say a special thank you to all of those who are here and who join in to my weekly tutorials. I'm so grateful that you come and watch or actually paint with me every week. I know there's many ways to enjoy art, and I'm just glad that you are taking an art break, either through watching or painting yourself. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. If you've already subscribed, make sure you click that bell so you get notifications of any new videos I might put up. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed watching this tutorial today. If you liked watching this birdie come together, here's a couple more videos you might want to check out. Well, let's take a closer look at what he looks like all finished.